I want to touch on something that I see many people doing it. It's intermittent fasting. What's your take on that?
I think the evidence is stacking up more and more that as a society we're buying too much food and we're eating too much food, and we can argue all day about fats versus carbs versus protein, but ultimately as a population we're eating too much, essentially. And I think there's more and more research now about fasting in various forms. They've done lots of studies into lots of different animal species. And if you take most species that they've studied, if you restrict the amount of calories they eat, they live significantly longer, even up to 30% longer in some species. So I think eating less does work. As for the type of fasting that you might want to do, I think very much like weight loss diets, pick the version that suits you. So there are some people out there that practice energy restriction all the time. So they eat 200 or 300 calories less than they really need every single day. That's quite labor intensive. That means counting calories all the time. Now, some people like the security of that. And for those people, I applaud them. I couldn't do that. But there are those people out there who do, and they get great results and they're generally in great shape. And there's various ways of doing it. This became famous 5-6 years ago, maybe, with the 5-2 diet, which is where if you're a woman, you eat 500 calories on 2 days a week. And if you're a man, you eat 600 calories on 2 days a week. And then the other 5 days a week, it's not what was published in the media. I bought Michael Mosley's book and I read it, and he advocates a healthy diet the rest of the time, but just not calorie counting. And you can get some good results from doing that. The other thing that's quite on trend at the moment is time restricted eating, where you limit the amount of food that you eat to only in a certain time. So you eat as much as you want, but only within an 8 or 10 hour period of time each day, so that you're fasting for the rest of the time. And I'm sure there are other ways of doing it as well. And people talk about doing a 4-day fast or a week fast where they just have water or they just eat fruit or something like that. And all of those have pros and cons. But I think ultimately having periods of time where we're not taking in calories is good for our bodies. It gives our digestive system time to rest and regroup, and it allows our body to concentrate on other functions other than processing food. So overall, I'm in favour of fasting in various forms.
Would you mind sharing with us whether you do any form of fasting yourself?
Oh, I struggle with it. When the 5-2 diet came out, I made a point of trying it myself because I wanted to be able to talk to patients about it. I found that I got too grumpy on it. I couldn't live on 500 calories a day for 2 days a week. It was making life not really worth living for me on those 2 days. Now, I've met plenty of other people who do very well on it, and they don't get hungry and they don't mind and they don't miss the food, and they do very well. For me, I think when I do fast, I would tend to either do a 24-hour fast where I don't eat anything from the end of my evening meal one evening until my next evening meal. So during the day, I won't be that thrilled with the whole process, but I know I've got a lovely evening meal to look forward to. Or I've had some success with managing with the time restricted eating, so I limit myself to a 10-hour window and then I fast for the other 14 hours on a day. And those are the two I've had the most success from, and I can recommend those. But the 5-2 is great as well. It just wasn't for me.
Okay. And when you say you fast, do you have any fluids at all?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I would drink water or herbal tea or black decaffeinated coffee in that time. I think it's really, really important to stay hydrated. It's important for many aspects of health that our hydration remains at a good level. You can lose lots of energy. You can even have a dip in your mental health. And there are lots of reasons to keep drinking water. So absolutely, I'd recommend drinking.
Hi, my name is Dr. Erwin Kwan. I am on a mission to dissect what makes high performers, innovators, and great leaders successful. With this podcast, I aim to share insights from interesting and exciting conversations with people who have figured it out to inspire you and empower you with actionable tips you can put into practice to hopefully improve your life.
My next guest today is Dr. Sue Kenneally. She's a GP with an interest in nutrition medicine and lifestyle medicine. She's a founding member and regional director of British Society of Lifestyle Medicine. We talk about small steps you can take to build healthy eating habits. We also talk about plant-based diet, its benefits, and the research behind it. Dr. Sue Kenneally also shares her approach to managing weight loss and managing high blood pressure with simple stuff you can do with your food. And we also dive into intermittent fasting. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Welcome to the podcast, Sue.
Hi, Arwen.
Hi. Today, I want to talk to you about lifestyle medicine, nutrition, for people who just learn about you. Can you tell them a little bit about you, Sue?
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here talking to you. And so a little bit about me. I've been qualified as a doctor for about 20 years, and for most of that time I've worked as a GP. I live and work in South Wales. I live in Cardiff and I work in the South Wales Valleys. And over the last 20 years, I've come to realise the importance of lifestyle in the way that I manage chronic disease in my practice. When I first became a GP many, many years ago now, I did so because I really wanted to help people. I wanted to help people get better. It dawned on me after a few years of doing general practice that sometimes I was helping people get better, and the things that I did really did help. So things like treating infections with antibiotics, giving people antidepressants for the kind of depression that responds to antidepressants, pain relief, time off work when they need it, all those sorts of things were really helpful. But when it came to chronic disease management, that's heart disease, chronic bronchitis, arthritis, those sorts of things, I realised I wasn't making anybody better. I was possibly helping some people to get worse more slowly, slowing down disease, but I wasn't actually treating or stopping or reversing much chronic disease. And I found that quite frustrating. I started by doing a degree in nutrition because I realised very soon into all of this that what people were eating was having a big impact on how they were in terms of their general life. And so I thought I'd go back to university and study that and get to know about it properly. So I did that over the next few years, and then came to my attention that a lot of people were feeling the same way as me. For a long time, I thought I was the only one. And I thought that all of my colleagues were quite happy sitting in their respective rooms, prescribing drugs and giving out advice that works some of the time, but a lot of the time isn't all that helpful. And I thought that maybe I was slightly crazy because I thought there may be another way of doing things. And it turned out, through the power of social media, that there were a lot of doctors feeling the same way. And gradually we found each other. And in the last 18 months to 2 years, we formed the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, which is an organisation that aims to help British people improve their health just by improving the way that they live.
More and more GPs are interested in lifestyle medicine.
Yes, I think that's happening more and more. It's difficult to know what's happening the most, whether it's just that people on social media and at the conferences are starting to find each other now, and so that they've always been interested in lifestyle medicine but haven't found out about the society yet, or whether there genuinely is an increasing interest. But I think it's a bit of both. When we first started the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, we had only a handful of members and we really weren't sure how things were going to develop. I believe now we're up to more than 500 members in only a few short months. And I think the more I talk to my colleagues about it, the more they're embracing it as a concept. I think it's a bit of both, but I'm very, very glad that more and more research is being done on this, because lifestyle, or suboptimal lifestyle, creates about 70% of my workload as a GP. So I'd be really delighted if everybody could embrace this as health professionals, because we could look after people better. And that would be less work for us. And of course, that's a distant second to it being much more beneficial for them too.
Absolutely. In many cases, I find that doctors who get into lifestyle medicine have a personal struggle they've had in their health. In your case, has there been anything in your life?
It wasn't so much in my own personal life, it was more watching the lives of my patients. I think over the years I've watched patients. I started off by seeing that patients who ate badly and had a lot of stress and didn't do much physical activity developed illness more readily than people who did eat well and managed their stress well and exercised regularly. It took another few years for me to realise that you'd actually change the path that you were on. And I don't think it was any major struggle in my own life particularly. I think I've just been fascinated with this since the day I started looking after patients.
You mentioned about the nutrition medicine course you wanted to do a master. Can you tell us a little bit about how you decided to do a master?
I started looking into this probably 10, 15 years ago, and I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do or how I wanted to achieve it, but I did believe in doing something that was substantial. I think that it's easy, especially with the internet so readily available these days, it's easy to learn about something without needing to have a qualification to back it up. So I thought if I was going to do a qualification, I might as well do something that is of a really high standard, like the gold standard. There are lots of different courses you can do now, but back in 2005, 2007, when I first started looking into this, there really wasn't much around. So I was looking for something that would definitely teach me about nutrition and would teach me solid science about nutrition, and also something that would complement my medical background. And there were a number of courses that were designed for people who were healthcare assistants and nurses and people who work in the allied healthcare professions. But looking at courses that were specifically designed for doctors, the MSc in nutritional medicine was one of the very few around at the time, and it seemed to me like the ideal. It seemed like the best one to do.
Interesting. I recently read an article in preparation for this interview about how doctors are currently not effectively trained in nutritional medicine, and nutrition plays a key role in a lot of diseases such as diabetes or obesity. Can you tell us how this changed your practice?
Yeah, it's changed my practice massively. I'd agree with you that doctors don't get really trained in nutrition. I went to medical school a long time ago now, but my nutrition education was about 3 or 4 days. And I was just given a textbook called The ABC of Nutrition. And I was told to read that, and there might be something in the end of year exam about it, but not to worry too much, because we were taught that nutrition was the territory of the dietitians. And I have to say, that I still believe that to a great extent today, that the most qualified people to give out dietary advice probably are the dietitians, and I work with a number of them and I respect them deeply. But I have to say that in my own practice, we can't refer everyone to a dietitian. And I think there are lots of things we can do as healthcare professionals that are fairly simple. Dietitians are very, very good at looking at the detail of somebody's diet and teasing out maybe the most critical and minute changes that people need to make. But when I'm sitting in a surgery talking to somebody who's diabetic and they're living mainly on junk food, I think it's fairly easy for me as a healthcare professional to make some changes that dietitians would approve of and would consider safe, because there are a number of things that are fairly straightforward when you look at them. So in terms of my own practice, it's really nice to be able to sit with a patient and they sit and say, oh, do you know, doctor, I'm really worried about my weight and I just don't know where to start. And instead of saying, I'm going to refer you on to somebody else who you don't know and it's going to take them a few months to get to see you because they're busy, I can say to them, well, do you know, I know a thing or two about that. Why don't we talk about that now? And so they're talking with someone who they know and trust, and it's immediate, because I've usually helped them with other things in the past, like their blood pressure or their cholesterol, and those things have tended to work out well. When I talk to them about weight management, they tend to believe what I'm going to say, are more likely to listen to it, and very often they'll go away and lose a fair amount of weight. So it's nice to be there immediately with people that I know well and be able to give fairly expert advice.
How do you go about changing the lifestyle of a patient? What are the things that you do to incentivize them?
Well, in lifestyle medicine, we talk about putting the patient in control. If I see somebody, you mentioned diabetes, so let's talk about that. If I see somebody whose blood sugars are way out of control and they're overweight and they're eating badly and they're not exercising regularly and they've got a lot of stress that they're struggling to deal with, I can talk to them about saying, well, this is where I think you need to get to. This is how I think you need to eat. This is the exercise I think you need to do. This is the amount of sleep I think you need. And this is how I think we should deal with your stress. But we can't make all of those changes at once. So let's talk about what you want. And then we can work together as a team and we can put the patient in charge and just say, okay, what are your priorities? We both know where we'd like you to get to, but that's a lot of baby steps. And I think you should choose which baby steps you take first, and I'll help you make them. So in lifestyle medicine, it really is about putting the patient in charge, and that empowers them to take charge of their own health.
I love this approach where patients just do baby steps, because it's important to make sure that as they go through the process of making this change, it's small steps that make big difference when you accumulate all of them.
That's exactly right. It's like many things in life. It's if you do a little and often, suddenly you find you've done a lot, and that implies whether you're talking about physical activity or even things like saving money or studying for an exam or anything else. If you just chip away at it, you'll suddenly look back and realize that actually you've achieved quite a lot. There are some people who say you should change absolutely everything all at once, because if you do that, you'll get massive results straight away and that will motivate you. But I tend to find that that's a bit too daunting for most of my patients.
The other thing about making changes is accountability. It's an important aspect of determining whether somebody is going to successfully make a change or not. And how do you find this factor when you have your patients and you discuss the plan?
Yeah, accountability is one of those big things that's very, very helpful. Of course, they can be accountable to me. I don't mind that at all. They can keep in touch with me and tell me how they're doing. Ideally, you'd find a supportive friend or family member and get them to come along to consultations with them, and we set the plan together. Very often it helps if one person's trying to make a change, then you can say to their spouse or their child or their closest friend, why don't you do this with them? And very often that can be very helpful, and you can get more results that way because then they've got someone else to lean on.
Yeah, it's much more powerful when they're doing it as a family and work together rather than one person in that family doing it on their own.
Yeah, that's certainly true. One of the problems I can see with that is if the other members of the family aren't really on board and they don't really know what the fuss is about and they think that they'd rather carry on living the way that they do. But hopefully, when we get the right motivated family, yes, we see really big results. It can be really quite encouraging.
I want to move now to plant-based medicine. Can you tell us a little bit about plant-based diet, Sue?
Yes, I'd love to. At the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, we follow the same sort of guidelines as the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and they advocate a diet based on fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. And now plant-based can mean a couple of different things. Based on doesn't have to mean consists entirely of. So you could eat a diet that's got fruit and vegetables and whole grains and legumes in it, and choose to add a little bit of oily fish or a little bit of meat or some dairy or some eggs, and that would still be plant-based according to one definition. The diet that I eat personally is the different kind of plant-based diet, which means it's based entirely on plants. So it's rich in fruit and vegetables and legumes and whole grains as per the BSLM definition. But when I'm adding in extra food, I'm essentially just adding in extra plants. I started eating this way a number of years ago now for many, many reasons, most of which was to do with my nutrition studies when I did my MSc in nutritional medicine. When I read about the benefits of plants in the diet, every time I was eating something that wasn't plant-based, I was getting more and more frustrating, thinking, well, there are only so many calories I can eat per day. And currently I'm eating something that isn't plant-based, and it's just not as good for me as something else I could be eating that would be plant-based. And ultimately I made the decision to make the full transition to be fully plant-based.
So you made that transition in how long would you say?
It's difficult to say looking back. I remember the day that I decided that was it and I wasn't going to go back to eating anything that had animal products in it. But how long before that day I actually started thinking about it and mentally making the switch was probably quite a long time. It might have been several months or even a year. I think there were a number of things that slowed me down. I was concerned about how I would fit into family life. Even though I had the degree in nutrition, I was still a bit concerned about how I would meet all my nutrient requirements. But I gradually read about this and listened to various YouTube broadcasts and various other things, and talked to some other friends who were making the same transition. And so probably several months. And then one day I woke up and said, that's it, I'm not going back. And I haven't, and I won't.
That's interesting. And probably your family is also on a plant-based diet, or is that not the case?
No, that's not the case. I live with my lovely husband and my 3 sons, and my children are old enough now to make their own decisions about their diet. And no, they all are omnivores. They eat any food. I have to say we've managed to make it work very well as a family. So if anybody out there is thinking, well, I'd love to be plant-based, but I just don't think I can fit this with my family, I'd encourage you that about 80% of what we eat in a typical British diet is plant-based already. So you're actually only changing a small percentage. And what we do as a family is we sit down with the same fruit, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, whatever we're eating that night. And the only thing that really changes is the protein source. So if family eating chicken, I might eat some tofu. If they're eating, say, a bolognese, I'll have something made with lentils. So it's fairly easy to fit in.
Probably if somebody has a motivation, they'll make it work for themselves.
Exactly. I think I'm blessed to have a particularly supportive husband because he does the cooking. He's a stay-at-home dad. But even though it's him that does the cooking, I still come home to find delicious vegan food on my table every evening for me. So I think I'm particularly lucky, but we can make it work.
Definitely. I want now to go deep into the evidence about plant-based medicine. If we look at the literature, we know that processed red meat is associated with colorectal cancer. Primary prevention of cancer is linked to plant-based diet. There's a lot of evidence that suggests plant-based diet is one of the best diets somebody can have. Can you tell us more about that?
I can, yes. As you say, there's a lot of evidence. Studying nutrition is notoriously difficult. There are two arguments. If you study people in a lab, you can control exactly what they eat and when they eat it. But then the argument against that is, well, that's not real life. And so you can't draw any real significant conclusions from that because it's an artificial situation. And equally, if you study people living in real life, you have very little control over what they actually eat. And so you can say, well, you're not sure that what you told them to do is what they actually did. So there are difficulties interpreting that evidence as well. So it is a challenge. But looking at the big picture, if you look at populations all around the world in what we call the blue zones, the people who live in populations where they routinely live healthily into their late 80s, early 90s, and they have the greatest percentage of people who live to be 100, most of them eat almost an entirely plant-based diet or completely plant-based diet. And there are other things about their societies. They're all quite active and they tend to have connected communities and they tend to manage stress very well. They have supportive families and supportive networks. But most of them eat an almost exclusively plant-based diet. So that's the global picture. And then if you look at other evidence, there was a lovely paper in the Lancet from a year or so ago looking at risk factors for death. So things that you do that are likely to result in you dying. And if you look at the top 20 or 30, some of them are smoking, some of them are alcohol consumption, having high blood pressure, that sort of thing. But in terms of nutrition, the top ones are lack of fruit, lack of vegetables, lack of fiber, those sorts of things, too much salt, too much refined sugar. Nowhere on that list is meat deficiency or dairy deficiency or anything like that. It's all deficiencies of plant-based nutrients. So that's the general big picture evidence. I think you can study populations in more detail as well, but that's the first thing. Is that the kind of thing you've read?
Yes, there have been studies about specific group of population like the Seventh-day Adventists. When they followed this population, they found that there was much benefit in the diet where they adopted a plant-based diet.
Yeah, that's right. I love the Seventh-day Adventists. They're some of my favorite people because they're really great to study from a nutrition point of view. If you look at a lot of populations, it's very difficult to compare, say, very deprived areas with very affluent areas because they have different incomes, different jobs, different levels of physical activity, different stresses. When you come to the Seventh-day Adventists, yes, they come from a whole social spectrum, but they tend to have the same beliefs about physical activity and stress management and sleep and all those sorts of things. But they do have a wide range of ideas about what's acceptable as a diet, except that they believe eating a healthy diet is important. So when you study the Seventh-day Adventists, there are far fewer what's known as confounding factors, things that might be confusing or biasing your evidence. So they're a great population. And yes, I've read a lot of the Seventh-day Adventist studies too. And what they found generally is people who eat a healthy plant-based diet have a significantly lower risk of heart disease. I've read anything from 15 to 50% lower risk in people who are plant-based rather than people who eat a standard Western diet. We know from the Seventh-day Adventist studies that people have, again, a lower risk of cancer. That can be anything from 10 to 15%. They have lower risk of blood pressure or high blood pressure, and they have a lower what's known as overall mortality risk. So their risk of dying early is greatly reduced compared with those who eat a standard Western diet. The other thing that they've studied is some people have managed to differentiate between a healthy plant-based diet and an unhealthy plant-based diet, because there are a number of plant-based products that they count as vegan in the sense that they don't come from an animal, but equally they're not necessarily healthy. So those would be things like refined sugar, refined white flours, vegetable oils, alcohols, those sorts of things. And if you differentiate between people who are vegan in the sense that they don't eat anything from an animal, but they don't worry about the health consequences, so they'd be quite happy to eat lots of fried food and baked goods and those sorts of things, and compare those with people who eat a whole food plant-based diet, the people who eat the standard Western vegan diet with the junk food don't really get any of the health benefits. It does need to be an unprocessed, healthy plant-based diet for you to get the benefits.
I'm glad you brought this nuance in healthy plant-based diet and plant-based diet which is not healthy, because one of the things we find in the Western diet is the high sodium level in food. We know that sodium in excess can cause high blood pressure, and there are other things about high blood pressure where food can have a big impact. Can you tell us a little bit about any advice you give people who are going on a diet with high blood pressure?
The first thing I would say is, if you can face it, eat a whole food plant-based diet. I say face it quite flippantly because it's my favourite way to eat. I know it's the way I'm going to eat, presumably for the rest of my life. If you do that, which is whole food, plant-based, and we also add no SOS, salt, oil or sugar, then your blood pressure will come down. It's fairly simple physiology, and that's predictable. We don't really need to go into that in too much detail in terms of the science, because that's just what happens. If that's a little bit drastic, the other thing you could do is the DASH diet, DASH. That stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And if you type that into any search engine, it will tell you what the DASH diet is. And that's essentially the kind of diet we're talking about in terms of the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, which would be largely based on fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes. It doesn't have to be entirely whole food plant-based, but if it's essentially based on plants with a few other things added in, then that will also bring your blood pressure down fairly effectively.
Thank you for sharing that. In terms of weight management, we hear a lot of diet, and there's such an overload of information out there with different fad diets. What is your approach to somebody who's coming to you for help if they want to lose weight, Sue?
The first thing I do is say, well, what do you eat? And it always entertains me that when I talk to patients about this, the first thing they tell me is what they don't eat. So I say, hi, what do you eat? And they say, oh, well, I don't eat chocolate, and I don't eat crisps, and I don't eat chips. And then I have to take a step back and say, I'm glad to hear that, but what do you eat? And then I really have a look at what they say their favourite foods are, because the evidence is that the most effective weight loss diet is the one that the patient will enjoy. So if I sit with somebody, and I mean, obviously I'd really love to say to everybody, eat a whole food plant-based diet, because I believe that's the best. But if I talk to somebody and I say, so take me through an average day, what do you eat? And they say essentially that they really like meat, that they have bacon and egg for breakfast, and they have a chicken salad for lunch, and then they go home and their favourite meal in the evening is steak. I think it's unrealistic for me to talk to them about a whole food plant-based diet. And so I suggest a number of diets for them. Sometimes I do suggest a low carb diet, because that is effective if you do a healthy version of it. Sometimes I suggest the Mediterranean diet, because you can do a Mediterranean diet eating lean meat and still plenty of fruit and veg. But if I can, I talk to patients about whole food plant-based. So if somebody comes in and says, I have cereal for breakfast and I love to have a sandwich for my lunch, and then when I get home I eat meals based on rice and pasta, then that's the time when I say to somebody, well, okay, how about instead of eating rice and pasta, have vegetables or salad instead, and instead of rice, think about having cauliflower rice or something like that. So it really does depend what the patient likes, and I try and be as flexible as I can with them, because changing what somebody eats is one of the most personal things you can do in the setting of a medical consultation. So I really try and work with what they already believe and what they already enjoy.
It's great to see that you try and customize a diet according to the patient, and there's no one size fit. Everyone is different. It's important to realize that to make a realistic plan.
Exactly. So it goes back to what we were saying earlier about lifestyle medicine, and saying, okay, this is what we'd like to get to. Let's put you in charge, and you decide which steps you're going to take to get there, and I'll help and advise you, and I'll signpost you to any resources that you might need. And I'll be along here cheering you along, and come and see me anytime you like, or give me a call, and I'll help you deal with any queries. And if you're having a bad day, let me know. And I find that doing it that way and letting them feel that they feel like they're in charge makes all the difference. And I've seen some really great results.
Can you tell us about portion sizes? Is this something that you teach your patients?
Yes, to a certain extent, particularly when it comes to protein. I try and teach them that portion of protein is about the size of the palm of your hand, which is useful because that takes into account people's sizes. Because if you're small, you tend to have smaller hands. So that's quite useful. When it comes to fruits and vegetables, technically it's, I think 80 grams is one serving, but I think that's too prescriptive. So I just say, a handful of vegetables or a piece of fruit. And you could argue that, a piece of fruit could be a tiny little tangerine, or it could be a big banana, or it could be a whole melon, which I don't think anybody would ever eat. But these things average out. So over the course of a week, if you're eating lots of different fruits and vegetables, that's how it averages out. And I think the most important thing to tell people when it comes to this kind of thing is to try and avoid emotional eating. A lot of people eat when they're not hungry. They eat because they're sad, they're lonely, they're stressed, they're anxious, they're too busy. And of course, when they're happy, the day of the year that most of us eat too much is Christmas Day. It's a time for celebration. So it seems in our culture, we always have a reason to eat. But one of the main things I try and say to people is, if hunger is not your problem, then food is not your solution. Please go and find something else to do. But if you eat a generally healthy diet, as we've been talking about, and eat only when you're hungry, and stop eating just before you're full, like the Japanese do. They talk about hari hachi bu, which means stop eating before you start feeling full. Then you should find that you'll manage your weight fairly effectively.
I love that. I think it's important to have system in place to avoid binge eating or eating on comfort, because personally I find that when you're doing your grocery, it's the first thing that you can do just to not buy this, make this conscious decision not to buy any of this junk food. So when you don't have it at home, you won't be using it.
Yes, that would be lovely. And that goes back to what we were saying about it's important to try and get the whole family or the whole household on board, because it's very easy for me to say, well, I just won't eat junk food then on a personal level. But I live with 2 teenagers and a younger boy. And of course, teenagers live on junk food if you let them. I try not to let them, but you have to be reasonable. So yes, we do have treat foods around the house, and some of those are suitable for vegan. And it's a challenge to stay on track and only eat whole food, plant-based most of the time. So if you can get the whole family on board, or if you live alone, then fantastic. Just don't buy it. It's difficult to do because the supermarkets and the food manufacturers have spent millions researching what will entice you to buy these things, and they're very, very good at it. So it'll need a lot of motivation to stop you from going down that path. But if you can, don't buy it, then please just don't buy it. That's the best thing.
Absolutely. If you don't buy it, you will consume it.
Exactly. It's fairly simple on that level, but it's sometimes quite difficult to do.
I want to touch on something that I see many people doing it. It's intermittent fasting. What's your take on that?
Intermittent fasting, yes, interesting. I think the evidence is stacking up more and more that as a society we're buying too much food and we're eating too much food, and we can argue all day about fats versus carbs versus protein, but ultimately as a population we're eating too much, essentially. And I think there's more and more research now about fasting in various forms. They've done lots of studies into lots of different animal species. And if you take most species that they've studied, if you restrict the amount of calories they eat, they live significantly longer, even up to 30% longer in some species. So I think eating less does work. As for the type of fasting that you might want to do, I think very much like weight loss diets, pick the version that suits you. So there are some people out there that practice energy restriction all the time. So they eat 200 or 300 calories less than they really need every single day. That's quite labor intensive, that means counting calories all the time. Now, some people like the security of that, and for those people, I applaud them. I couldn't do that, but there are those of people out there who do, and they get great results, and they're generally in great shape. And there's various ways of doing it. This became famous 5-6 years ago, maybe, with the 5-2 diet, which is where if you're a woman, you eat 500 calories on 2 days a week, and if you're a man, you eat 600 calories on 2 days a week, and then the other 5 days a week. It's not what was published in the media. I bought Michael Mosley's book and I read it, and he advocates a healthy diet the rest of the time, but just not calorie counting. And you can get some good results from doing that. The other thing that's quite on trend at the moment is time restricted eating, where you limit the amount of food that you eat to only in a certain time. So you eat as much as you want, but only within an 8 or 10 hour period of time each day, so that you're fasting for the rest of the time. And I'm sure there are other ways of doing it as well. And people talk about doing a 4-day fast or a week fast where they just have water or they just eat fruit or something like that. And all of those have pros and cons. But I think ultimately having periods of time where we're not taking in calories is good for our bodies. It gives our digestive system time to rest and regroup, and it allows our body to concentrate on other functions other than processing food. So overall, I'm in favour of fasting in various forms.
Would you mind sharing with us whether you do any form of fasting yourself?
Oh, I struggle with it. When the 5-2 diet came out, I made a point of trying it myself because I wanted to be able to talk to patients about it. I found that I got too grumpy on it. I couldn't live on 500 calories a day for 2 days a week. It was making life not really worth living for me on those 2 days. Now, I've met plenty of other people who do very well on it, and they don't get hungry and they don't mind and they don't miss the food, and they do very well. For me, I think when I do fast, I would tend to either do a 24-hour fast where I don't eat anything from the end of my evening meal one evening until my next evening meal. So during the day, I won't be that thrilled with the whole process, but I know I've got a lovely evening meal to look forward to. Or I've had some success with managing with the time restricted eating, so I limit myself to a 10-hour window and then I fast for the other 14 hours on a day. And those are the two I've had the most success from, and I can recommend those. But the 5-2 is great as well. It just wasn't for me.
Okay. And when you say you fast, do you have any fluids at all?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I would drink water or herbal tea or black decaffeinated coffee in that time. I think it's really, really important to stay hydrated. It's important for many aspects of health that our hydration remains at a good level. You can lose lots of energy. You can even have a dip in your mental health. And there are lots of reasons to keep drinking water. So absolutely, I'd recommend drinking.
Thank you for sharing that, Sue. I want to touch on the busy life of professionals, especially doctors, how to make sure that you eat healthy. For example, as yourself being a GP, it can be difficult to organize your day and have your lunch and make sure that you stay healthy. What are the tips you have for busy people?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it's one of the big challenges of modern life, isn't it? I have to say this is all about preparation. It's famously said that failing to plan is plan to fail. And I stand by that. That's one of my. So in my own personal life, I make a point of making the food that I eat during the day extremely easy to prepare, so that there's very little effort involved. So for me, that means planning my week ahead. So either on the weekend, thinking carefully about what I'm going to eat and going out to buy all the fresh ingredients, or it means having easy things available to me during the day. So I do a lot of cooking and freezing ahead. So for example, I'll cook a vegetable and lentil soup. And if you don't want to eat a plant-based diet, there's no reason why you couldn't do a chicken soup or another meat-based soup if you wanted to. So I'll cook up a huge batch of a healthy soup, and then I'll store it in smaller containers with enough for each. Each has just one portion of soup in it. And in the morning, all I have to do is grab my breakfast, which would be something like porridge with some blueberries in it, which takes a couple of minutes. And then I grab a portion of soup from the freezer and a couple of pieces of fruit and maybe a bag of nuts. And that's my food for the day. And it's taken me maybe 2 minutes to organise first thing in the morning. Today, as an example, I wanted to eat 2 meals throughout my working day because of the way my day was stacked up. So I had my porridge and blueberries this morning, which took a couple of minutes while I was making the kids' breakfast. And then I took a portion of frozen soup with me to work. and I took a sweet potato and a mini pot of hummus with me, and I just microwaved the sweet potato and ate the pot of hummus on top of it before leaving for work, knowing that I was going to be talking to you. All of those things took a very short amount of time to prepare, but it's about the planning. If you don't put the effort in, it's very easy to succumb to the junk food. I find that a particular challenge because where I work most of the time, there's actually a tuck shop, which is a big cupboard full of beige food sold at knockdown prices, and it raises money for charity. So it's very easy to think, oh, well, I won't bother eating the soup. I'll just go and get a couple of bags of crisps. And I'm doing the world a favour because by doing that, I'm donating money to charity. And so I feel warm and good inside about supporting this lovely thing that these people are doing. But actually, I'm hurting myself in the process. So it's all about planning. So it's about getting simple menus and using your time effectively. That's all I can say.
Preparation and batching is definitely the way to go if somebody wants to have a healthy week with food that they've made themselves.
Absolutely. It's how I live my life. And in the days when I don't manage to do that, say if I've been away at a conference for a weekend, so I haven't had a couple of days to plan, things do get pretty scary in terms of food preparation, and I have to pull myself back and say, no, really, you need to find time to get back on track, get to the supermarket or get the stuff delivered and sort yourself out, because it's so easy to fall off the wagon.
Definitely. What common bad advice do you hear about nutrition, Sue?
Oh, bad advice. I don't like the term clean eating because to me, clean means you wash the fruits and vegetables before you prepared them. The word clean doesn't really mean much in the scientific nutrition community. I get a bit concerned about superfoods. There isn't really any such thing as a superfood. That's, again, a marketing term to get people to buy particular foods. And I think anything that's too restrictive. So I get very worried when I hear the latest celebrity diet saying, I don't know, eat only 3 different ingredients on your plate, or eat only so many calories a day, and I'm talking about ridiculously small number of calories now. I'm not suggesting that a calorie controlled diet is a bad one, but people who really advocate the very low calorie diets, I think, are causing trouble. And I think it's people who are not properly trained in nutrition giving out their opinion as fact is the main problem. So I think that the biggest advice I would give in this regard is fact checking. We live in a world of fake news. Nutrition world is as much at fault for that as anybody else. So check your facts before believing anybody on the internet.
Definitely. There's so much information out there. People can be confused.
Absolutely. I think that's part of the reason that I wanted to do this degree. It's because I myself was confused. And that's only increased exponentially in the last 10 years because more and more people are using the internet to broadcast their opinion or their research. And so it's just got more and more confusing. So I would say stick to sources that you absolutely trust and don't necessarily believe the next fad just because somebody you look up to happens to believe it. Check it out first.
Now I want to talk about how do you organize your week too? Because as a GP who works, you probably have pressure all the time. How do you find this harmony between work and life?
I think you have to purposefully do it. I don't think it's something that happens naturally. I see so many people, particularly colleagues, talking about, burning out and being really stressed. It's something that in my life I've had to learn how to do. So I intentionally set aside time for physical activity. I intentionally don't stay up later than I should do. I make a point of getting the healthy food in. And I think if you don't do these things intentionally, then other distractions will get in your way. It's so easy to spend endless time on social media or flicking through the TV, or none of these things are bad, but it's easy to let them distract you and not stick to the main purpose at hand, which for me is maintaining my health. It's not my only priority. Of course, I have many priorities, but keeping myself healthy is a big one. And we all have the same amount of time in the day, and it's about using that time effectively. So it's about making time to concentrate on it. It's different for everybody because people have different goals, but if you believe something is important enough and you think it's achievable enough, you will do it. So it's about just having that motivation to get up and do it.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think having habits definitely help, and making sure that once you've developed this habit, then it just effortlessly.
Yeah, the power of habit is a huge one. That's something we talk about a lot in the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, actually. We're in the moment of the Just One Change campaign, which is when we say to people, just make one change. So we talk about deciding to, as the name suggests, make one change to your lifestyle and just build it in. So you need a cue. So one thing we talk about is when we're thinking about physical activity, one example is every time I boil the kettle to make a cup of tea, I'm going to do some squats or some sit-ups while the kettle's boiling. And then the most important thing after that is to reward yourself in some way. So if you've built the habit of always doing some light physical activity when your kettle is boiling, then make sure you treat yourself in some way. So that could be giving yourself some time off, or eating some sort of healthy treat as long as you're hungry, or treating yourself financially, buying yourself something lovely. I'm not saying that you should do that several times a day, because then you'll have money problems, but finding some way to celebrate your success. And celebrating your success is a really important part of changing your life.
Yeah, it's all about completing this cycle of rewarding yourself.
It is, and the more successes you have, the more you'll be motivated to try on the next challenge and the more difficult challenge. And before you know it, you'll have achieved a lot. So I'd really encourage people to start small with simple things and celebrate every single success that you have, because it's so important to your psychology. Your subconscious mind will learn that you can do this, and it will automatically start programming you to have more successes. So always reward yourself.
Yeah, that's really effective. And I want to share my own personal struggle I've had with sleep, and it's something that I've been having problems. I make sure now that I go to bed at the same time every night. So when it gets to around 10:30, I make sure that I'm off the screen and I do something relaxing like reading a book. And then I find that when I have this system in place, it does help.
Yeah, absolutely. It helps a lot, particularly with sleep. So much of our sleep is to do with habit. And there are lots of things we can do, aren't there? Like cutting out the caffeine and, as you say, having a relaxing pre-bed routine, and maybe having the hot bath, because the act of cooling is something that's very sleep-inducing. And of course, using the apps that you can use for devices that take out the blue light, because blue light is a very strong stimulator of wakefulness. So if you can download an app, they're freely available on most devices, so that you have less blue light coming into your eyes as you're going off to bed. That will massively help you sleeping. And as you say, once you get into the routine, it becomes fairly easy. It just becomes what you do, and you do it without thinking. And that's the key to a lot of this.
Now I want to shift to the rapid fire questions, Sue. So I'll ask you some questions and tell me first thing that pop in your mind. What is your definition of success?
It is being the person that you want to be. It doesn't mean money, it doesn't mean fame, it doesn't mean popularity, it means whatever you define it as.
What took you a long time to realize?
The importance of sleep, actually, since we've been talking about it.
Yeah, sleep has such an impact on everything we do.
It does. It's the foundation of everything else, and I did not know that until recently.
Have you dealt with what seemed to be a crisis or failure at the time, which later turned out to be a blessing in disguise?
Yes, I have, very much so. In my work life, I've changed careers a couple of times now, and I'm so grateful that things went wrong when they did, because now they're going the way that I need them to be, and I'm realizing that I wouldn't have become the person I was meant to be if I carried on with my old career. Definitely.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, sure. It was a long time ago now. I used to work as an anaesthetist in hospital, and various things happened all at once. I was doing okay as an anaesthetist, and looking forward to a long career in it. And then I reached a point where I had to apply for a big training post, which would have meant basically leaving my husband behind, not leaving the marriage, but leaving him behind to go and live hundreds of miles away from him for anything up to a year or two at a time. And I had to take a long, hard look at my life and say, well, only the very, very best anaesthetists get the opportunity to stay near home. And it was clear that I wasn't going to be one of the top few. I was doing okay, but maybe not well enough to get one of those jobs. And so I was faced with either pursuing the career that I loved in anaesthetics, or leaving and giving up to do general practice, which would allow me to stay at home with my husband and start the family that we wanted. Circumstances worked out such that I ended up giving up anaesthetics and becoming a GP. And I love my anaesthetic colleagues. They do a wonderful job. I have nothing but the deepest respect for them. But I would not be teaching lifestyle medicine now if I stayed in anaesthetics, and I think I would have missed my life's calling.
Thanks for sharing that, Sue. I think it's a common problem that doctors who are in training find themselves where they have to go somewhere for a training post, and it's quite difficult to be isolated and leaving the loved ones behind.
It is. I think it's something that we as a medical profession really need to address, because it's a great cause of stress and anxiety and misery to lots of people. And looking at lifestyle medicine, the biggest determinants of health in our society are a sense of purpose, a sense of connectedness, having loved ones around us. So taking somebody out of their family environment and out of their support network, be it family or friends or loved ones, and putting them somewhere that's fairly isolating, it's actually fairly damaging to long-term health. So I think we're actually harming doctors by doing this.
Yeah, there have been a lot of research that have suggested that support network is key to happiness and longevity.
Absolutely. We can talk all day about manipulating people's blood pressure and their cholesterol and their blood sugar and their weight and so on. And that's all important and valuable, and we should do it. But ultimately, we really want to see a difference in people's mental health and their longevity. Then we need to be looking at the more social things. As I said, having a sense of purpose, believing that you're contributing to your society, having loved ones around you. These are the things that affect your long-term health more than anything else a GP is going to do for you.
Who is the most interesting person you have met?
I'm going to say the person who informed my journey towards plant-based medicine. I haven't actually met him in person, but we've talked online, and I've followed all of his work for years. That's Dr. Michael Claper. He's one of the plant-based doctors in America. I've found his way of teaching to be absolutely spellbinding, and his content to be absolutely on the money. And when I was transitioning to be plant-based, he was one of the main people I listened to. I owe him a great deal.
Which book you've read that has completely changed your approach or the lens you have on life?
From a health point of view, the most recent one that I've read is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. That was the book that made me completely transform my opinion towards the importance of sleep. That's had a huge impact on my health personally. If you're looking at books in terms of success, then I very much enjoyed The Slight Edge. That's all about how to achieve your goals, and that a lot of these books are written about how to get rich, but you don't have to apply them to that. You can apply them to how to get fit, how to get healthy, whatever you want to do. So The Slight Edge was a big eye-opener for me. I like to read a wide range of different books, so it's very difficult to pick one.
Yeah, there's so many interesting books. I'm just going through Matthew Walker's book at the moment. It's fascinating. He does an amazing job of collecting all the relevant evidence and putting that in an interesting read.
Are we talking about Why We Sleep?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the book of the moment. Everybody's talking about it. And I'm so glad that he wrote it.
What are your takeaways from this book, Sue?
The importance of a non-negotiable 8 hours sleep opportunity a night. So it's difficult to say I am going to get 8 hours of sleep tonight, because we all sleep differently depending on the room temperature and our stress levels and what we've been doing during the day. But the key factor is sleep opportunity. So to get into that bed and to lie there with the intention of going to sleep for 8 hours. I think that's one of the big ones. I immediately downloaded a filter to take the blue light out of my devices, and I've changed the way that I eat as well. I eat earlier so that my body's not trying to digest food and try to get to sleep at the same time. And if I hadn't done already, I would totally have given up caffeine as a result of that book. As it happens, I coincidentally gave up caffeine about 10 years ago for an unrelated reason. And I think that's a big message of the book as well.
There's so much misconception about caffeine. Reading that was an eye-opener.
Yeah, did you have any other take-home messages from it?
My take-home message from it was to make sure that I have some routine before going to bed and waking up at the same time as well. So even if you've not had a good night of sleep, you wake up, you don't just lay in bed, because that's going to affect your sleep later this evening.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know, I made the mistake of doing that this weekend. It's getting towards Christmas now, and I met up with some friends on Friday night and stayed up a little bit later than I normally would have, only by an hour or 90 minutes, something like that. So when I went to bed on Friday night or the early hours of Saturday morning, I thought, well, I'm not going to switch an alarm on, because I wake up at the same time every morning anyway. And I'd had a busy week. I was really tired. And I had 8 hours of sleep and woke up 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours later than usual. I felt jet lagged for the whole day. I felt terrible. I felt great the next day, but yeah, that extra hour or two in bed just made me feel awful. It's so important to get up at the same time or thereabouts most days when you can.
Anything in particular that you would want our audience to use, like any parting advice you've got?
When it comes to diet, which is what we started this all about, wasn't it? The British Society of Lifestyle Medicine would say they like what Michael Pollan wrote, which is eat food, which means real food. And if you read his book, The Food Rules, it's really quite funny. He says things like, it's not food if it's come to your hands through your car window from a drive-through. It's not food if it's called the same thing in 20 different countries. It's not food if it comes in a bright pink crinkly packet. Those sorts of things. So eating real food, and then not too much. So what we were saying about eat only when you're hungry, stop eating just before you feel full, and try and eat real unprocessed food in the process, and then mostly plants. I'm also a member of Plant-Based Health Professionals UK, which is a plant-based organisation aimed at teaching people the benefits of a fully plant-based diet. Personally, I try to eat food not too much and entirely plants, but if you can't make that change, then eat food not too much and mostly plants. And I think if you did that, you wouldn't go too far wrong.
Thank you for sharing that. One last thing I would like to ask you is that, when people try a plant-based diet, what would be the first dish you would suggest? Because one of the things I find is that people think that plant-based diet is not tasty as meat and it puts them off.
Okay, I would say it's more tasty than meat. If I look at some of the foods that my family eat, when they're talking about meat, they eat chicken or beef or lamb. If I'm looking for protein sources, I can eat about 20 different types of nuts and seeds and beans and all sorts of things. The variety of food is far greater. Again, it's very difficult to say to a wide audience, try this one meal, because there are so many different food preferences out there. So I think what I would say is just think about one meal and think about how to make it plant-based. How would you enjoy it without the meat in it? And don't worry about your other meals. Just get into the habit of changing that meal, because most of us are in a fairly substantial rut when it comes to what we eat. We tend to eat the same meals over and over again. So one of the first things I did was to change from eating spaghetti bolognese to eating spaghetti with lentils in a spicy tomato sauce. And that just became my habit. We were talking about the importance of habit earlier, and it just became a habit that I had little portions of lentils in spicy tomato sauce in the freezer. And when my husband was cooking spaghetti bolognese for the family, I would just say, can you please defrost me one of those? Then when it came to having my porridge for breakfast, I changed from dairy milk to almond milk and just gradually made little substitutions now and again. It was only when I thought, right, now I really do have substitutions for most of my main meals, I'm going to take the plunge and say this is how it's going to be forever. I didn't rush it, and for me the biggest challenge was changing from dairy-based spreads to non-dairy-based spreads, because I really did love those. By word of encouragement, I live in a family where there's lots of dairy around, and a couple of weeks ago I ate a mouthful of what I thought was toast with some dairy-free spread on it. It actually turned out to be dairy-based spread, and these days that just tastes rancid to me. So I recognised it straight away and spat it out. But just to encourage you, the thing that used to be my favourite food when I ate meat and dairy now just tastes strange. And I would never ever go back, because I love the way that I eat now.
Thanks for sharing that insight, Sue.
Welcome.
Where's the best place for people to connect with you and see what you're doing?
I think probably the best way to get hold of me, if you're a Facebook user, I have a public Facebook page called Dr. Sue Kenneally. Kenneally is Kenneally. My website is under construction at the moment, so I can't direct you there. But if you want to email me, I'm at sue.kenneally@btinternet.com, or you can contact me through the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine. If you just send them an email and say it's for the attention of Sue Kenneally, it'll find its way to me.
Thanks very much, Sue, for taking the time to come on this show. And you've shared so many insights with us and practical tips, which is awesome.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening till the end. I hope you can implement some of the insights we discussed. If you have not already subscribed,
I suggest you hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video.